Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of the Cyber and Risk Leader series. Today, we've got a very special guest, Katie Arrington. Hi, Katie. Can you first introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them a little bit about what you're doing for work at the moment?
So my name is Katie Arrington. I was the former Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Defense for acquisition and sustainment. So I was over about $380 billion of spend from weapons to infrastructure to ensuring the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, was getting compliant with cyber requirements. I left the department in February of this year, and I have a lovely little boutique consulting firm called LD Innovations, where I am working hard to help companies, get compliant, look at risk mitigation strategies, and not take that burden on full time as something they may not have the resources to do.
Fantastic. So before we get any further, I always like to ask, what do you get up to outside of work? So what things are you interesting? What do you do with your spare time?
Grandchildren. I love my 4 grandchildren. I spend my time traveling to go see them. And aside from that, I will say I am probably the worst, but I give it my all pickleball player in all of South Carolina. Horrible, but it's not that I'm not giving everything I've got.
Fantastic. So you kind of mentioned a little bit about your current role. So can you give an overview of your career? How did you get into cyber? Did you start off in IT?
Absolutely not. From a little girl born in Fairfax, Virginia, I, from a very young age, thought I was going to be a lawyer. Absolutely was my track, my goal. Life changed for me drastically. I made a lot of decisions, and that it ended up. I was a military wife. I'd gone to school for about 2 years for political science, married a grunt in the U.S. Army, and traveled around the world with him for 15 years. So I went to more technical colleges. I joke around, I've taken accounting 101 9 times. I have more college credits than a doctor would need, but I have no degree. So I am the poster child for you don't need a degree to understand cybersecurity, the role of Chief Information Security Officer. I do have, my credentials of CISSP, et cetera, but when I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, where I currently reside in 2001, prior to that, I had worked for a freight forwarder called Expeditors, and it was a U.S. Customs broker, and ended up going down to Charleston, opened a company, and then sold it, and then opened another company and sold it on real estate and land development. And about 2005, I fell in love with cyber. And it's been an epic love story of knowing that there's so much out there. When Al Gore created the internet, he didn't know what he was doing, right? He had no idea. As these lovely devices have come into our lives, the security around it and the capability have just overwhelmed us. So I started my career in cyber off at Booz Allen as a capture manager on cyber portfolios, then just dove deep in and, worked at a small business, a service disabled small business called Centuria. Then I worked at a company called Dispersive Technologies, which was a startup. Then I had my own startup and I sold that. And then I became a state legislator in South Carolina, very dedicated to getting cybersecurity right in the state of South Carolina. Did that for 4 years, ran for Congress, and it wasn't successful, but then went right into the Pentagon as a HQE, highly qualified expert on cybersecurity, and created the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program. Another program I created there was Trusted Capital and Supply Chain Risk Management. And then leaving this February this year, out on my own, doing the exact same things, but absolutely love because people think cyber is IT, and it's not. It's IT and IA, information assurance, are a part of it. But cybersecurity is something very different, and risk management is another one. It's all a part of it. But my love, I bought a book, Coding for Dummies, and I am the worst coder, I would say, but at least I understand binary and I can help. But it's a love, it's a passion. And I'm so blessed in a lifetime that I get to do work that I love, so it's not work, and I can't turn it off.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? Like actually getting something that you enjoy, that you're interested in. And I think the thing with this space is you're constantly evolving and learning new things. There's basic principles, like a lot of security principles are very similar, but obviously they've adapted and changed over time, which you're still keeping current. And that I like that part of my job where you get to understand these things, keep it current. And there's always something new on the horizon, which, I mean, keeps it interesting to some extent.
Oh, absolutely. There's never a day that goes by that I'm not surprised of a new, TTP from an adversary. Just, oh, okay, didn't even think about that. And that's part of, I think, the problem for a lot of people is that, we are working from one company, when we're trying to do, things for that country. When you realize what most firms face is a nation state attack, it's not that 16-year-old in the basement that you wish it was. It's, the entire nation of China, all of Russia, all of Iran, and their military components going after our commercial sector, which is, challenging, especially for the small and the medium-sized businesses out there that are completely unaware that they're being, exfilled every single day.
Yeah. So how are you spending your time currently, and what are the key priorities that I know you said you've been doing some consulting? So what are the key focuses of what you're working on?
So there are three pillars. First, I am hell-bent on creating a supply chain risk management consortium, where small businesses, medium-sized businesses, manufacturers, et cetera, can come in and for a very, very low fee, be able to look at other vendors and the risk associated with them and helping them navigate this. So very much interested. I'm hoping, knock on wood, that will go live in January. Have all the pieces together, the companies working, and now just starting to sign up members. So doing that out of volunteerism because I believe in the cause. Secondarily, as I'm helping companies understand risk, and that's, whether they're looking at their CMMC and how they're going to be, if sadly they're not compliant, how they're going to get there, and working through, the ROI. What is the return on investment for companies to implement the entirety of the NIST 171? And I would say additional, because I don't, the 171 to me is basic. It's, it's what you should be doing every single day as a company. And then the third pillar is strictly guiding people around the snake oil salesmen that are out there, telling everyone there's easy buttons. I can get you certified and I can give you zero trust in one button. And that's not the case at all. And, so three distinct pillars. One's voluntary, two, income producing to some degree, but I would rather, I love what I do. I feel bad charging people for it.
Yeah, I guess there's two things I wanted to pick up there is like risk management, because like everyone gets obsessed with compliance, but goes, actually, what are the underlying risks involved in this? Because they're like, oh, I'm compliant, I'm secure. You're like, they're really not the same thing. Like that means you're doing the right things, but obviously you need to put it in the context of what your organization does, all the other things you're doing. And I think people get very lost in, well, I did the NIST 171, I did the 853. Why did this happen? It's like, well, okay, but there's more risks outside just putting the controls in place.
Actually, I spoke on a panel yesterday about just that, and how, as businesses are looking to team together on bid and proposals, things that we would ask each other if you were renting a home or an apartment for me, the questions you would ask, we don't think to ask people we're going to be doing business with, having our companies intertwined to deliver a capability. And it was a room full of business development and capture folks. And I said, are you asking, your teaming partners when you're putting your teams together, what their risk stance is? Do they have a risk mitigation strategy? Do they have a compliance manager that's helping them with all of the different compliance? Compliance isn't just CMMC or the NIST. There's ISO. There's so many
PCI. There's so many. I mean, insert 25, 30, 40 things depending on what your industry is and what you have to do.
And I mean, the UK, the UK led the world on getting cyber standards, although the UK's were primarily around data privacy, but also taking that into consideration. We are working in a global world, a global environment where it's a global world. But we're this global marketplace where you really need to say, okay, listen, I'm very interested in doing work with this company overseas. How do they look at it? And how does that translate? And in the Department of Defense, every country has their own unique security agreement with the Department of Defense. Because there are different laws and statutes around the globe. In business, it's something that's, I would say it's not new, but it's as we're really looking at our Five Eye partners, and truly, the UK, Australia, Canada, big partners for the Department of Defense. How do we do more together and be respectful of each other's compliance issues is one that I spend a decent amount of time on.
Fantastic. So I know you've mentioned it a lot, CMMC. So a lot of organizations have been asked to tackle, I'm going to call it a behemoth, this big thing.
Yeah.
Can you explain to the listeners what the scope of it is?
Sure. So the scope, when I started, so back in January 2019, I'm, first day in the Pentagon. They tell me, we need to unify cybersecurity standards. It's very complicated for industry. And the reason they brought me in to do the CM is I understood exactly what they were talking about, coming from industry, working at literally every level of industry, from large business to service disabled veteran owned, to a technical startup, to owning my own. I got it right. I had to take my own company from CMMI nothing to CMMI level 3. So that was one standard. And the Department of Defense said to me, my boss, Kevin Fahey, and the Honorable Kevin Fahey and the Honorable Ellen Lord, and they came and said, the biggest challenge is industry says that we don't have any, continuity. And I'm like, well, we do. We have the DFAR Rule 7012, which clearly states that any company handling CUI has to be compliant to the NIST 800-171. That was done in 2015 by President Barack Obama. It was in every U.S. contract in 2017, and everybody was just checking the box saying they were doing it, and we knew that they weren't. Obviously. So the CMMC, when I started it, I really wanted it to be, some people say I tried to boil the ocean, but I understood in like the ISO standard 27001 and the NIST 800-171 and the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? There were commonality in the requirement. They weren't worded the same way, but they had the same derived output. So I mapped all of that together to create a maturity model, like things that you would do, the basic FAR, there's 17 controls, but actually it's only 15 requirements in the FAR, right? Which is CMMC level 1, which is basically, do you have a password? Do you change your password type thing? All the way up and to build on to maturity. And we originally started off with 5 levels. CMMC 1.0 was 5 levels, and it was a compilation of all of these different standards to a maturity model. Level 3 in that old model was what is currently in the DFAR Rule 7012, which is be compliant to the 800-171. Levels 4 and 5 back in that model were what was happening with the NIST in the 172 or 171 Bravo or the additional, like a 24-hour SOC capability, those were unknown at the time in 2019 because they were still deliberating what was going to be in and not, so level 4 and 5. Fast forward to CMMC 2.0, right? So we're only at 3 levels now: level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 is the basic self-assessment. Level 2 is CMMC, it's the 171, and level 3 is an enhanced, which will either be, the additional, 35 to 24 controls, right, on top of the 110 in the NIST already. It was meant, when I created it with my team, it was meant, and I not to disrespect any of your viewers and listeners, but I wanted it so an 8th grader could read it and understand it.
Didn't need, because there's a lot of people who this applies to who are not security experts and they're being asked to comply with it. So it's I think, look, you tend to see some of these things, you're reading it and you're like, what does this mean?
What does it mean? Oh no, absolutely.
You read some standards. I mean, look, some are pretty good at saying like the policy controls and stuff where they're fairly consistent. There's other ones where you've got to unpick some of these things and you're like, what am I being asked to do here?
Exactly. And that was really one of the, the catalysts. My original team was Stacy Bosjenic, Buddy Dees, and John Choi. And, we went out to Carnegie Mellon and Johns Hopkins and said, let's, bring the best of the best together. What was really funny in the first 4 iterations in the year in 2019, yeah, gosh, wow, I forget how fast I moved on that thing. One of the things I give my team back then, it wasn't me, it was them. We met every deadline. I said, we're going to give, we're going to give everyone I think the first iteration came out in early 2020. We did 4 iterations, public comment. We brought everybody together, and it was actually industry that said to the Department of Defense and to our team that the NIST, they didn't think that the NIST 171 was sufficient. They wanted these extra 20 controls that we had put in through all this comment. Never missed a deadline, never missed a date. Take that, I took it very seriously because we were, moving, an entire ecosystem was standing up around this. And then the thing that caused the most consternation is, as in any other government, right, a change of government, everybody wants to take a pause and say, what were you doing? That pause in 2021 was, I would say, the worst thing that they could have done. To reconstruct the program instead of continuing to move forward. That was a bad decision made by leadership. Understanding, you need to take a minute to look at everything, but this is a matter of national urgency, national security, and we've got to keep moving. But they've taken the pause button off. They reconfigured it. I left the department to try to run for Congress. I thought it would be easier to go inside the belly of the beast to fix it versus trying to do it from the department, because it is really hard doing anything like this at this level. I'm not a patient person. That's I wasn't.
I feel the same. Like, you want to get things done, you want to push things through, and it's just like red tape, and you end up just getting very, I guess, frustrated.
So the way I looked at it in the department, and the Department of Defense, I love the department. I honestly would go back in a minute if we were at a place and a time where we could move things through quickly. The leadership that I happened to be under at the time was amazing. And not to say that there aren't good leaders in the DOD now. I think Bill LaPlante is phenomenal. I think Dr. Heidi Shue, I love Heidi Shue. She's been around. She's just really, really good. And Bill LaPlante, just good people trying to make good things happen. But the challenges are so monumental to get anything done there. And I'm saddened that industry hasn't done more to volunteer to get certified. And they're still kind of pushing that idea around. On the other hand, when I wake up and I look at LinkedIn in the morning, or I read, any kind of cyber or defense, the CMMC keeps coming up, and I sit back with all of, I've done in my life. And I birthed 2 incredibly wonderful children. I have 4 amazing grandchildren. I'm blessed beyond words. But on my gravestone, I do want to say, Mommy of the CMMC. I want to see that.
Fantastic. So
having children and making good people primary, God gave me that job, and I that one was this big one. Secondarily, biggest thing I ever did in my life was I made an impact, right? I was a disruptor.
Yeah.
And we need more disruptors to make us uncomfortable with content. Complacency is a deadly thing. People should never be complacent. And
people don't like change, right? I mean, the other thing is, like, you kind of also saying, look, there's this thing, we've brought things together, and by the way, you now need to be certified, and there's a deadline. Whenever these things happen, I mean, we had it with GDPR, I'm sure you've had it with other privacy laws there.
Yeah.
People aren't happy about it. They hate change, and they hate kind of being dragged in to say, actually, you need to do these things. If you don't, there's a consequence now.
Well, yeah, it's, to me, you think about businesses and, a restaurant, and this is the part in the United States I cannot get beyond. If a restaurant, the health department within the state that the restaurant exists, came and said, well, we want, instead of all of your sinks at 98 or 100 degrees, the hot water, we want it at 115 or 140 degrees. And you're going to need to add an additional bathroom. Our requirement now is that you have 1 bathroom for every 20 people in the restaurant. There wouldn't be any restaurant looking to the state to say, okay, are you going to pay me for that?
Yeah, because it's just common sense, right? And you should be doing it.
And we've been telling companies since 2015 to do the NIST, and they haven't. And now the big complaint is it costs too much. It's too hard. No. If you want to get something done, my mom had so many amazing, God rest her soul, but she would say these things to me. If you want something, you will make it happen. Otherwise, you will make an excuse, right? If you want it, you will make it happen. The second thing she said is, I'm the middle, if you can't tell, of 3 children. I'm a middle child. I have all the earmarks and quality traits of the middle child. But my mother would drill this into me. Don't come to me. If you come to me with a problem, you better have a solution. Otherwise, you're whining. And I don't tolerate whiners. She's like, if there's a problem, find a solution. I've spent my whole life. I don't understand the word no. I need to find the yes. There's always a yes. So when I left the Pentagon, I gleefully handed over reins to Stacy Bastianic, who last night won. She was one of the federal 50 movers and shakers, and I'm very proud of her. But the reason why, when I was the CISO and I was looking to, who was going to bring onto this team, because that's another thing, is understanding your own weaknesses and strengths as a leader. This woman had the same mentality. Like, there's always a way we can work through a problem. When you hear the word no, she doesn't understand that word either. And I'm so blessed that she's been there, she took the reins over and is continuing this. But I think that's probably one of the things that most industry is struggling with is, we're supposed to be doing this. We should build it into our rates. I've recently heard of at least 3 submissions on RFPs to the government that said, we are going to increase our cost 10% across the board to be compliant with the NIST. And they still won the work. Because the government knows. I mean, they don't want, lowest price technically acceptable was probably one of the worst things to happen because it drove people to say, okay, yeah, I'm doing it, but I'm not really doing it. And the challenge right now is, and another, side thing I've been doing is working to get the appropriators, the authorizers, and the correct committees in the legislature to understand, if you really want compliance, you're going to need to add the money to the defense budget, because programs today, the DOD budget, as people are realizing, oh, now I need to start doing this, the cost of doing it will go up, and they need to give more money to the DOD. Not to say that they don't get a lot already, but I will say, I think there's a great deal that could be done to streamline the Department of Defense in many, many ways. And I think that for industry, one of the things coming out is, what the White House put out in an executive order, and they want to have a new, the software bill of material, and they want NIST to accredit software, which scares me because NIST is a standards body, not an accreditation body. So that's not in their realm. But the valley of death to get into work in DOD or in the federal government in any capability is long. Now you're going to have to go through this initial NIST verification. Then every single agency that you go to, you're going to have to work to get an ATO. I would love to see the government work on streamlining the ATO process to have reciprocity. Just like in the CMMC, there's reciprocity for the one set, the ISO standard, there's reciprocity for the Essential 8, there's a reciprocity, because you shouldn't have to redo things. I think that's going to be something that in the next year, we're going to be feeling a huge impact. And we're going to lose technology to our adversaries who are just saying, no, we're more than willing to take it and test it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's lots of things there that kind of, I guess you've covered, but there's a lot of organizations looking at this saying they've been affected by CMMC. What do you think the cost implications are and the ROI on doing CMMC?
So for me, I think that many of the small businesses should go with an MSP and a CSP, a managed service provider and a cloud service provider, for a bulk share of the work. I did a white paper. I figured about 80,000 companies, and I did the makeup. The vast majority were companies under 50 employees, and the range for the product of having a GCC high instantiation ranged from $1,200 a seat to $10,000 a seat, depending on the size of the company. The reality is you're going to make that investment, or you're not going to be involved in the Department of Defense. It's ultimately you're going to do it, or you won't be awarded work. And I love when people say to me, small businesses, we just will go work elsewhere. Well, the world is on the verge of, we're in the middle of a recession. We're in it, right?
Want to be changing what you're doing now? Probably not.
Probably not going to be anything new and burgeoning coming on scene. And the DOD is pretty steady work. And if you think that you're going to go elsewhere and get a commercial entity to worry about, what your profit margin is, that just isn't going to happen. They'll bleed you dry.
And you also think, like, if you look, we have it where they'll be like, okay, you need SOC 2 certification, you need to be ISO 27001 certified to win this contract, you need to do X, Y, Z. If you think you're going elsewhere to win big contracts and there's not going to be a bunch of things pushed onto you, it's probably very naive. I think
so what's really funny in America, we have Jen Easterly, who's at CISA, saying, that, TSA trains, planes, they need to have cybersecurity. Infrastructure needs to have cybersecurity. When I talked about DIB being 300,000 companies, I understood very clearly what I was talking about, because I knew the Department of Defense was the largest purchaser of power in the United States. So critical infrastructure already has cyber requirements on it for the most part, since they're, you look at where a military base is, we're buying power from the local power supply.
Yeah.
You are required, because that is considered CUI, to be NIST 171 compliant. Yeah. The United States federal government buys rail space. We buy containers on rails. So they're already, the railroad is supposed to be compliant. Airplanes, airports that move military personnel or military product have to be compliant. So the standard's already there, and there isn't going to be an industry you can go to where it won't be there, right? And I think people get caught up on the fact about, well, do I have CUI or I don't have CUI? And I think the world would be a better place if we took the whole CUI discussion off the table. Everybody should consider their company as CUI.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got data and it's important to you, like in theory, you should be trying to protect it. Well, not in theory, you should be, right? I mean, and you've got your customers' data, you've got information, and there's all kinds of things you do where ultimately you need to make sure data is heart of all businesses now. And if you're not protecting it, you're in trouble.
Yep. So I just don't understand why people wouldn't get it done. Just stop whining about it. Get it done. There's bigger problems coming down the pipe. We're looking to run out of diesel fuel here in a few months, in a few weeks here in the U.S. We have supply chain crises around the world, geopolitical challenges everywhere we go. We have enough problems.
Yeah.
This one, check off.
And look, the other industries are just used to it, right? I mean, if you're working in anything for financial services, like this is just table stakes, right? And it's just bringing, and look, everyone follows generally financial services, pharma at a certain point, or healthcare, right? And then it filters down and everyone does it. I mean, this is slightly different, but ultimately these things happen and the rest of the world follows on and goes, right, we have to do this. And it's probably people kicking and screaming, but in the long run, they will benefit from it.
Well, people were kicking and screaming when, electricity first came, and they were kicking and screaming when, streetlights were first put in, and it's, any change is uncomfortable for people. And and back to why, the CMMC writing it for an 8th grader to read, that anything new, everybody of course is fearful of, right? But that shouldn't prevent you from diving in and getting it done. I mean, I think that's the human experience, right? When we're afraid to do something and we come out on the other side and we're like, that was amazing. It's in corporations. Yeah, it's a big thing to tackle and, get on it. Because if you wait, and this is the part that I've told, people are like, well, what's going on with the rule? I'm like, the rule is going to happen. So pushing off getting certified just means when the rule goes live, you're going to be in queue with everybody else who's pushed it off and kicked that can down the road. And you may not win work because you may not be able to get certified in time. So I'd go do it now.
I think the other thing here is it gives a good baseline for building a comprehensive security and compliance program that realistically you should be doing anyway, and use it as an opportunity to go, actually, at a senior level of the business, we've probably not invested properly in this. Look, you may have, but it's standardizing and building a compliance program, a security program that will scale with you. And look, you should do that anyway, right? That's something that everyone should be thinking about. So look, one of the things that, I work for a technology provider. What role do you think technology is needed to support CMMC? Is it something that you see as pivotal?
Oh gosh, yes. Jack of all trades, master of none. Please, I beg of people, don't try to be the master of everything. Yeah. Unless you're, a large company, to be able to do everything in the CMMC is intangible. And I knew it from the get-go, right? I knew that you would, I was excited when we first announced CMMC, and I had a lot of software products come to me and say, well, I meet these requirements in the NIST. Hugely impactful, right? You should look for technology partners who are able to provide you some parts of the CMMC. And I say parts, like even if you go and you get a GCC high cloud instantiation and you have an MSP, there's still back work at home you need to do to be compliant. Know that using technology to complement your current ecosystem is a good thing because the technology is on the cutting edge, right? You want somebody who's constantly bettering their product, right? Versus you having to figure out what's going on, in each of these areas. So I strongly suggest, I've always thought that technology partners were going to be critical to the CMMC. But what I'm leery of, right, is the snake oil salesman that, goes in and says, I'll get you certified overnight. And that doesn't work.
We see it all the time, like where you see people saying, oh, we'll get you ISO certified in a few weeks. And you're like, look, you can buy, I've heard it, like, we can buy this tech. It's got all the standards in it. I'm like, okay, but do you know how to implement those standards? Because like you can put all the standards in a system and say that we're in a spreadsheet, but have you got the evidence you've done them? Have you got all the policies and procedures and underneath them to say that you've done them? Have you got all the evidence collection over a period of time? If the answer is to no, then there's no magic there to go backfill all that stuff.
Somebody at that panel I was on yesterday, they're like, well, we can do it. And I'm like, no, you can't. You might be able to deliver, and download software, the training, the implementation of it into processes and procedures, documentation of it, right? Making sure that you put whatever widget in isn't going to affect another widget. And if you have, I look at Navy vessels, right? You look at a boat or a ship in the Navy. They don't get updated until they come back to port. So you're a company that's working with, your contract, you're on board with a active carrier, they're out to sea, and you're saying you're doing this. Well, you don't have a satellite connection to upload that. What the hell are you talking about? It's knowing, right, the nitnoids of it. But it's start at a place of, okay, these are the things I know I can do, and I have the people and the resources and the talent to do it. And then open yourself up to technology partners that are going to complement you, because just know, jack of all trades, master of none. If you want somebody who's really good at, encryption, take the encryption. If I think passwords are passe. I'm big on tokens. I don't think passwords are a good idea anymore. I think end-to-end encryption in email is a good idea. The Colonial Pipeline here in America wasn't anything more than they didn't update their passwords. And the GAO report on the Department of Defense, why, the DOD inside, the GAO in 2018 said, the Department of Defense, the administrator's password was for the most part $PA, $,
I mean, yeah, it's the thing, isn't it? Like you can put the best policies and procedures in ever, but like ultimately if people don't follow them, you don't test them, you don't check them, you don't do reviews on them, what's the point of having a policy? Because the auditor is going to come, or when you have to certify for any standard, it's going to, okay, there's your policy, let's go have a look at a few things and see how it's
where the challenge lies. I was on the panel. I was with this lovely young woman from Microsoft, and she's like, the more automation, the better, right? Let's get this as much automation and AI behind it. And I'm like, yes, I'm with you on that. But the OODA loop is a real thing. And, if 1987, if a Russian sergeant didn't look at a satellite and go a radar read and say, that's not really possible, we may have been in World War III back then. And I think the human in the loop is definitely the key. The other part is, I think some companies look at it like it's a weakness, right? That they're awesome because they have to go out and look at a technology partner. Yeah, no, I think it just alleviates so much. It's just my own thing. I hope people reach out and test and do due diligence on your technology partner. We definitely need to do that. Due diligence. Don't take everybody's, I've come in with I'm awesome and I can do everything. Okay, can I talk to a few of your current customers and let me know what they think of your product, right? Yeah. They should be able to handle. You check references when you're trying to get a job. You check references when you're trying to get a house or an apartment. Why would you not check references when you're looking to say this entity, yes, come into my home, come into my network? So do your due diligence, but yeah, use them.
Fantastic. So the other thing here that the CMMC, I'm assuming like it's moving down the supply chain, right? It's getting to all kinds of organizations. So is it applicable to all organizations? Where does it stop?
It doesn't, right? So if you're a prime, and what's really funny, I don't know if you caught it, this past week, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, filed a lawsuit against a company who wasn't doing basically compliance on their vendors and were exposing people. And they brought a lawsuit up against them. For the large primes or a prime in any case, you need to have in your teaming agreements. You need to have, as you look down your supply chain, it's going to be in RFPs and RFIs. First your CMMC. How are you going to have compliance on CMMC down your supply chain? But also they're requiring, what does your supply chain risk management program look like? How are you managing risk? We want to understand that. How do you plan on dealing with risk? So the flow down, originally when we started this, it's a natural progression. There's a lot of cross collaboration. So it's very rare you find a company in the DIB that only works with one other company. Generally, they work with a multitude and they're on a bunch of different contracts. So we figured in the rollout over 5 years, it would, trickle down throughout the entirety of the supply chain. I still stand firm that, once you start requiring it, the prime requires you to do it, to go after the bid. And they should sign up for the Joint Surveillance Volunteer Program right now. We should be working as a unified group industry on what are the incentives to do that right now. Because the longer we put off, and I think it's harmful to our national security when you look at as the work that we're getting and we're moving through and we're building. We're issuing contracts today that are going to be good for 5 years. And the further we delay this and the further we push it off, industry, do yourself a favor, get on board now, get compliant. And as you start your teaming agreements, that's where it's, that's why I talked to BD and Capture yesterday. This is where it starts. Start asking, okay, are you on the track to get CMMC compliance? Okay, when do you think they'll be there? What is your plan of, your rates on this, right? Because we want to understand the rate that you're putting so we can write a good RFP and submission and say, we take security so seriously. Rates are generally, we may be a little bit higher than other people, but they may not be compliant, right? That's what people should be doing immediately. And
you get what you pay for, right, with this stuff. Like, I mean, ultimately, like, if it looks too good to be true,
it's too good to be true.
It doesn't pass the smell test, right? I mean, and unless they're just doing it to win things, but like long-term contracts, like if it looks too good to be true, it generally is. Like,
and we all know you want to be competitive. I mean, I get competitive. I've, been on both sides. I've been on technical evaluation boards in the Department of Defense, and I've written, my P-win rate is almost at 100% when I was writing proposals. So I understand, how to win work, but there's something to be said where you're putting out into the government and saying security is the most, anybody should put it in their RFP response, right? It doesn't matter if I deliver this on time with the performance criteria and at the cost that we agreed upon, if it's been exfilled before it even makes it to the warfighter. And that's exactly it. And I know everybody wants to win work, but take a second and remember why you're doing what you're doing. And the lovely young woman that I was sitting next to with from Microsoft said it yesterday. She has a huge team at Microsoft and why they're there and doing what they're doing. And she said a lot of them came to work in the tech sector because they had served time and their life was, potentially put in jeopardy because a capability failed. That that was one of the driving forces of why I went right to the DOD. I don't tell this story often, but in 2007, my first husband was in Iraq and doing a perimeter tour on May 24th. His Humvee, he was in the turret, went over a new storm drain that the US government had put in, the allied partners had put in. And if you've ever been in a Humvee, they're battle torn and tear. Why I was so passionate about comms was that my Doug said halt, and nobody heard him in the rest of the Humvee because the comms were so bad. They ended up going over that storm drain inlet. It was laced with white phosphorus, slit through that Humvee like a hot knife through butter, and his whole team passed away, and he was the only one to survive. And I look at that that is something, that fuels me immensely. And the part of it, and it's how I kind of got to the department, the PEO of the MRAP was a man named Kevin Fahey. And I remember him going to Congress and watching him say, Congress is beating him up pretty hard. And they're like, are you going to field test this MRAP? And he's like, it's a truck. I'm adding armor to a truck. I'm not going to field test a truck. I'm going to put the armor on the truck. I'll field test the drivetrain in theater. People are dying.
Yeah.
And that's why I went to work at the department, was that guy and that passion. And it's that passion, right? So if you're a pilot taking off in a Black Hawk and the adversary has gotten into one of the systems and you go down, people's lives depend on it. It's that serious. I mean, that's cyber is where, think about this. If our adversaries were to come in and cut off power to the Eastern Seaboard, a low-level EMP wave over the national capital region, our country would implode. We have to be prepared for this type of thing. And we have to be, an EMP is going to be, unless they start burying all the wire and fiber, right? It has to go underground. But you think about it, the likelihood, and why the supply chain matters, right? This kind of goes into that whole conversation, why you should be asking people in your supply chain, right? If the easiest way to get access is the lowest on the chain, right? The easiest to get in, and then you just go up.
Yeah, you just move up, right? You're only as strong as your weakest link. You get in, and then it was quite interesting. We had someone else, a guy called Ben Corral, who was on not too long ago, and he was saying when he was I think he was a communicator in the army, and he said like one of the systems, like the password failed, and this was like in the late 90s. So they had to ring him up, and they went, "Oh, it's fine. There's a hard-coded password, whatever it was. Just put this in." And he was like, "That doesn't seem right." And you're like, and look, I've seen that in things when I did like original audits on like SAP, where it's like, oh yeah, the key financial systems of a company, and it's like, oh, it's still got the base password of the system admin in, and you can go and do whatever
and that's scary.
Yeah.
And you're opening yourself. That's why I say teaming is where it should start. Like, what is your posture? Because I really don't want to work with you if you don't take your stuff as seriously as I do.
Yeah.
My brand, my company, my employees, my IP, what I've built, it means something to me. And if it doesn't mean that much to you, I really don't want to work with you. And I think that's the posture a lot of companies are starting to get, as the ransomware is really, really taking off. I mean, what Killnet did with the airports, a couple of weeks ago, took those websites offline.
You jumping the gun here, just on to the next question, which is.
Go ahead.
No worries. So there has been a great deal of cyber attacks recently across infrastructure, schools. I guess, what are the key takeaways from these, and what can we learn from them?
That it's only going to get worse. This is just the start of, you're starting to see the cyber war that we have been in for a minute now, starting to affect people in day-to-day life. and it's only going to get worse. Our adversaries. So you look at what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. Stalemate. And I've said for years now, the next war is not won in a kinetic fashion. It's the non-kinetic war that is going to be where countries fail and societies fail. And it's cyber. It's the capability to turn off electric or to go in and, what happened at the Los Angeles United School District, right? They put all the student and teacher information, salaries, everything out there. There was one, yesterday I saw that there was, for $5 million, you can get access to 476 companies through ransomware access. This is the new world order, right? But this is I would say, the industrial revolution's cyber revolution, that if you're not cyber secure, you're not going to be in business long.
Yeah. And you think there's big money in this, right? These are not like someone in a bedroom anymore. These are very, very sophisticated groups, nation states who are able to throw ridiculous money and skills at these things now. It's not a
2022 estimate on what we have lost in ransomware and cyber espionage globally is in around the $8 trillion mark. Yeah, it's a big business. Yeah. It's a very big business, because they, to get the information for free or to exploit someone, it's unbelievable the amount of money that they're making, right? And it's not like you create a DDoS attack, right? You throw it out, you put it out onto the net, and phishing schemas, etc. How you get out there? It's cheap.
Yeah,
it's cheap, and it's unlike building a weapon, right? That takes years and a lot of, right? This is not a precision thing, right? These guys are getting good at the attacks. And when they hit one supply chain, it's like when FireEye, and it's not to say FireEye isn't a good company, right? But do you really think that whoever went through the arduous work to insert malware into a software penetration software only did it to one?
That's the point, isn't it? That obviously, this is and where it's coming from. I mean, there was, I don't know if you remember, it's probably about a year or so ago. Obviously, it was in Sweden, supermarket chain, it was a big, basically just couldn't operate for 10 days. I mean, I remember, was it 4 or 5 years ago when Maersk went down, the shipping company, and they controlled what at the time was was it 1/3 or something of the shipping in the world that just couldn't move. And it's the impacts of this stuff is colossal.
2 or 3 summers ago in the United States, Target, when Target got hit and went offline, it was pandemonium. You don't want to make the suburban mom going to Target for the run, not be able to pay for it, right? That's uncool. Yeah. But so I say the adversary is going to do it slowly, methodically, make our lives painful, uncomfortable. And the art of war, the easiest, most effective way to win against any adversary is to let them fight from within. Let them destroy themselves within. So as ransomware comes out, thank goodness for Elon Musk buying Twitter and getting, some realism right out there. But imagine if a adversary, this is as easy as it can be, right? And I tell people this and they're like, no, not really. You're using a really bad example. No, I'm not. Health information exchanges. It's where, in America, we keep our health information records with our insurance companies on these HIEs, and that they're very well protected, but nothing is 100% secure. Yeah. So, they go in and they screw around, they get into the system and they change the algorithm for pacemaker. They delete it. And then they put out a tweet the next day. Anybody with this pacemaker, blah, 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 blah. It's going to have a patch update because they always get updated. They're software enabled now, Bluetooth enabled to get updates. It's received a upload that it's going to defibrillate you and put you into cardiac arrest within 12 hours. People rush to the hospitals, say, rip it out, take it out. And the person at the desk is going, what do you mean you don't have a pacemaker? We don't see it in your records. We can get you scheduled for an ultrasound, but it may take till a couple of days. How many people do you think? And that's literally what the adversary is doing. And then the TikTok thing drives me absolutely batty, because people are like, oh, it's so funny. China has a completely different algorithm for TikTok for their youth. It is about good things. It's about good, what they're doing amazingly well at, right? And the algorithm for Europeans and especially Americans is getting us to do stupid stuff, right? Seeing what we're willing to do.
Yeah.
But also, it's people don't understand when this is cyber warfare, right? They know your IP address, they know where you live, they have your facial recognition.
You can see inside your house where things are. You can understand. I mean, digital footprint, right? I mean, the reality is, like, it's just not explained to people. Like, you're putting things out there, and once it is out there, you may delete it, but it might have been reshared, and it's gone elsewhere and elsewhere and elsewhere. Like, the problem is you're not educating people. I mean, maybe they are, but it's like, be sensible. Think about what you're putting out there.
The youth have no idea, right? Yeah. They're just like, oh, it's okay. It's just TikTok. Listen, your adversary is really interested in what's surrounding you. They want to buy it up, right? So they have control. Yeah. It's all about control. So, and for businesses, this is, you think about it, right? What would one tweet do to say, if somebody was to put now mind you, not correct, but that your company, your quality assurance, or, that you had a product that failed, and bad press travels far faster and it's far more detrimental than any good news. As a recovering, trying to be a servant leader politician, right? One good lie travels a hell of a lot faster than the truth. And people have to realize that's where your adversary's at, and taking you out, eliminating the DIB, eliminating the capability in the DIB by, ransomware, by false stories, by, infiltrating. And I'm not saying it happened. I'm just saying this is really odd to me. A couple of years ago, do you remember the F-35 had to get grounded because the fasteners got changed?
Yeah.
Okay. The supplier didn't change, the supply chain didn't change, but suddenly somewhere along the line, the fasteners were being tooled 1 millimeter off. And your company, right? If you're a manufacturer, do you know that the machine that you have plugged in and it works on your network, it calls out to get updates? Do you know the IP addresses that, are you looking at that?
Yeah, you scanning the external perimeter. Do you actually have a good understanding of what you've even got? Like, I mean, look, the amount of organizations where you're like, okay, do you understand what your attack surface is? They're like, yeah.
I have 18 laptops. Yeah, I wish it was just that, right?
Yeah. How many mobile devices? How many other things?
And here's the other side of it, right? As we have all moved to hybrid environments. Now, we don't all work in an office anymore. So we were on this panel, and I was on with Charles, who is a dear friend, and he's like, the worst thing that you can do, your employees think that they're going out and they're traveling and they get in a rental car, right? And they're taking their device, which has your email, right? And they're plugging it into the car, and they're Bluetooth thing syncing so that they can get to folks. And then you just leave, right? How many people have gotten into a rental car in the past year and you say, Ethan's iPhones, it's like, guys, the adversary loves you. You're so easy, right? The same thing when you go into, I always carry my own hotspot with me. Because I don't log into, if you're staying at a hotel and your company, and granted VPNing, right? You're coming in, but know that you're entering through a portal that is owned by somebody else. Think about that. They're controlled by somebody else. And your VPN, once you get your VPN, is great, but it's like you're walking through glass to get there. that's where all this is coming, the stuff that's people just don't think, would you think that, oh, wow, if an adversary wanted, to watch, pick a person in particular, they're tracking because you're foolish enough to put all your capabilities and certifications out on LinkedIn, they're tracking you and they watch you rent a car. They just go rent that car. And it's not that hard.
I mean, you can see it from even just like, if you look at like how clever advertising software is, right, and how targeted it can be. And when there's money involved, what can be done, put two and two together. Like it's not difficult when they can profile you, understand everything about you, where you go, where you shop, what you do. I mean, there used to be a thing, I think, in the UK where years ago, like this, like, like club cards, like a card for when you spend at a store. They used to be able to say, actually, I know when you're having an affair before because your spending patterns have changed, right? So, and that's 20 years ago that they could do that. I mean, we've moved on a long way since then.
So there was a study done, I think it was 5 years ago, facial recognition software, off the coast of Norway, I want to say it was. But this software had identified 5 million fish separately. They all had their own identity. They knew these fish by the scales, by how they were colored. They were individual fish, 5 million of them, underground, underwater. Now that's 5 years ago, right? This space, it's just scary to me what we are not thinking about our exposure, and we get caught up in the disinformation that we're given, and we take because we've been raised in a certain time frame in life, right? We were subject to critical thinking because we didn't have the access to the internet that this generation does. Well, my kids did, right? We had to have the critical thinking of saying, that just seems too good to be true. Because critical thinking was a part of our thinking. It's not for most people now. It's something that, if it pops up on here, it's real.
Yeah.
It's not. This is not your friend. This is a tool. And you should learn how to harness this to work for you and you not work for it. That's the base premise for the CMMC is have your technology work for you.
Yeah.
Save you, to protect you, and not, work for the technology. Reverse that so that you're the master and the commander of your domain.
So we're going to move on to a few, I guess, final questions before we wrap up. So what do you think makes a good CISO?
A good CISO is somebody who can listen and translate. IT folk speak a different language than the C-suite would probably understand, right? A CISO can understand all the different aspects. So they're the chief information security officer. Doesn't mean that they're just about cybersecurity. They're about physical security. They're about risk mitigation. So a CISO really needs to understand and how to prioritize what risk and vulnerabilities are out there and be able to effectively communicate. Selectful neglect. There are certain things, there's just no return on investment to go after. There's a significant return on investment to go after this. These would be the policies and protocols and procedures that should be in place to give us the best shot of winning this war or getting this. But a CISO's best skill needs to understand that they're the belly button of a team, of the entirety of the organization. They're the belly button. And they have to be able to listen and communicate effectively to the other in the C-suite what the challenges are. An IT guy saying, listen, my encryption keys are they're not, I need to get new encryption keys, right? And I need $1 million over the next, 6 months to get this all done. How do you convey that to the lawyer and to the CFO who are like, wait, what? Why do you need that? Where is that written? Where do we have to have that? Well, the CISO would be the one to say, okay, well, it's in this contract that we have to have this done.
Yeah. Here's the risk if we don't. Here's the you're building up, like you're taking technical problems, you're understanding the actual risk of that problem, and then you're conveying it to business people to go, look, if we don't do this, here is the consequences, this is what we should do. Ultimately, you need to make this decision, but my recommendation would be A or B.
And risk, critical thinking and strategic thinking are critical to a CISO. And know that you're not going to solve every problem, but the ability to listen is huge. And then say, okay, with the best of knowledge. Now, what I think is really important, and we need to have a larger discussion, is the hold harmless, then the safe harbor for CISOs, because they are making decisions based on the information that they have. If a decision turns out to be wrong, that's the challenge, right? Everybody's risk adverse. I don't want to be the one to say who did that. I don't want to be. That's why I was really good at what I did in my job, because the buck stopped with me. I was okay with taking that risk. It didn't, losing my job if I made a bad decision was something that I was willing to accept that risk, right? That's a problem for a lot of people, that they're afraid to be the risk taker. Or the other side of that coin, right, is to walk into a company and for people that have been your friends or your associates for 4, 5, 10, 20 years, and you're coming in and you're saying you're doing it wrong. That's a hard pill to swallow, right? Like, yeah, you're not doing it right. So, I mean, there's a lot of things, but I think that we need to help the CISOs with safe harbor, with, you're bringing problems to us, we shouldn't, hang your hat on them. You look at Uber, Joe Sullivan, bless his heart, right, made a stupid decision. When Uber got hacked, he, went and found the hackers and signed NDAs and not tell the FCC or anybody else about it. That was a bad CISO move, stupid CISO move. But it's also, if you have a CISO who's coming in and saying, okay, listen, there's 2 of our vendors. I actually had this conversation with the CISO of one of the largest companies in the US 2 nights ago at dinner. And he's like, there's a particular entity that has had a ransomware attack. And the first thing I said to do was quarantine them, cut them off. And the only way we can talk to them is by the phone. That's how we talk to them. And we get this established. That is CISO. That's the decision that you have to make and say, okay, cut them off now, immediately. And then we need to triage, and we'll come back to you. We'll get back to you. That's what we need in CISOs. And the fact that CISO has earned the respect within his organization, that when he says that, they're like, yes, we need that.
So taking on from building on what you said there, so what are the lessons that we can learn from the last year? And how would you apply them going forward?
The lessons of the past year, first, ransomware is exponentially up. I've read, reports that vary anywhere from, it's up, 75% to 200% from the year before. So the lessons that we've learned is, complacency and avoidance and not trying to, not getting on it is costing you money, whether you realize it or not. To just go ahead and do it because it's needed for your business to succeed. Don't wait for the government to solve your problems. They're not there to solve your problems. The United States, our Constitution, is not a problem-solving entity, right? That's not what we founded ourselves on. So if you're waiting for the government to come in and save you, they're not, right? You get hit by ransomware, and I'll give you a true story. It was Christmas Eve 2020. We got a phone call. Secretary Mnuchin back then got a call and called my boss, who called me. And a small business within one of our more critical supply chains had gotten a ransomware attack and had $1 million, fee. And they're just like, so how do we pay that? And like, we don't pay terrorists. We don't pay ransomware. That we don't do that, right? That company went out of business. Are you willing to, and it's happened and we're watching it. So are you willing to risk losing your business versus investing in getting compliant to something you're already supposed to be doing? And as you have witnessed the past year, if it hasn't taught you, and they can take an airport website offline, if they can hit a colonial pipeline, if they can go into school districts, there was hospitals that have been hit. You're no different than anybody else in the ecosystem. And if those people who think that think about a hospital, school, and airports, and you think you're better,
Yeah.
Come on. If that isn't what you've learned in the last year, you've learned nothing.
Yeah, well said. So if you could have one wish in security to solve one thing, what would it be?
I wish that for the United States, I wish Congress would pony up the money to give to the Department of Defense to not argue and belittle the fact that you should have already been doing it. Let's just get the money to get it done.
Yeah.
The resources to get it done. That would be the Katie wish, right? That I've asked for $10 billion to go into the DOD, to sprinkle it through so that those companies who can't get compliant. We continue the work. We move on. This is our new level playing field, and let's just go for it.
Yeah.
That would be my wish, because otherwise it's going to be a painful few years. And the way the DOD budgets work, the federal government works. For anything new to start, something old has to stop.
Yeah.
And that would be my wish.
So we always ask this question right at the very end. What one security leader, if there is someone you'd like to refer for us to get on this podcast?
Harvey Riskoff.
Okay, fantastic.
Have you ever met Harvey Riskoff?
No, I haven't.
He is one of the world's, and I will introduce you to him,
Fantastic.
cyber lawyers. And he has been a dear friend, just a phenomenal. To talk to Harvey in an hour, you get a lifetime of education. And as far as cyber law, there's nobody better that I know of than Harvey Riskoff. He's, if I had a playing deck, I always say if I had, I talk about people playing poker, right? Who would I have in the hand for me to play poker? Harvey would be my lawyer, that guy. So I will connect you to Harvey Riskoff.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Katie, for your time. Really appreciate it. Can you let our listeners know where they can get in contact with you? If you've got LinkedIn, any other areas that they can reach out to you on?
LinkedIn, just, Katie Arrington. There's only one of me out there that I'm aware of. But my email, if they want to reach out to me, is karrington, KARRINGTON @ldinnovations.com. More than happy to chat with anybody. Love talking about cyber all day, every day. So don't think any people are like, I'm sorry to bother you. You're supposed to be really busy. I'm no more busier than anybody else is. So I'm always ready and open to talk. But thank you once again for the opportunity. And I can't wait actually to watch the Harvey interview. That's he's just such a good egg. He was the lawyer over Gitmo. I mean, he's just got some crazy stories that he's done, but he was one of the resources I leaned into and talked to about, what is cyber insurance going to look like? And Harvey is the guy. So
fantastic.
I will look forward to that interview.
All right. Thank you very much, Katie. I appreciate it.
All right. You take care. God bless. Be safe. Be well. And
thank you. See you later.
Bye-bye.